Oh my god, I didn't see there.
I love to read.
For fun?
Hey nerds, my name is Mina. I'm a reader. I read, yes. But most of the books behind me actually on the shelf, I haven't actually read. Most of these books are nonfiction, they're art books, and they actually belong to my boyfriend's grandpa who passed away some years ago. So we inherited a bunch of books that I haven't gotten around to reading. For this video, I wanted to talk about books because I'm familiar with booktok, I'm familiar with like anti-intellectualism discourse and the overconsumption of books discourse, and I'm also familiar with the concept of using a book prop as a fashion accessory, especially online. Actually, the recent Skull Studio show during Copenhagen Fashion Week, I'm not sure if you guys saw that, but they featured models carrying books down the runway. So I'd go so far as to say that hotgirlification of reading has taken the fashion industry by storm and is definitely connected with the fact that Bayonetta-style librarian-esque prescription glasses have also come into vogue. The structure of this video is going to be kind of weird, I guess. I just have a lot of thoughts about reading and books in today's online digital age. So yeah, let's just hop into it.
Suppose I'll have to read all this.
Before we get started, I just want to bring attention to our sponsor for the video, ThredUp. ThredUp is an online consignment / thrift store, and if you have been following me for a while, you know that I love thrifting. I love shopping secondhand. I think it's one of the most, if not the most sustainable way to shop and acquire new clothes, and also it's the best way to find interesting pieces that are so unique and that no one else has. So I'm really excited about this partnership, and now I'm going to show you what I got. Okay, the first item I got was this Adam Lippis wool pullover sweater, and it's, first of all, super soft, such great quality. I wasn't familiar with Adam Lippis before, but he's a luxury designer, and his prices are so high on his actual website, and you won't believe that I got this sweater for literally $36. The second item that I got is a Marc by Marc Jacobs button-down shirt. I decided to layer it with this suit set that I already own. I don't know, I think this whole outfit is very like cotton candy office wear, and I'm obsessed. I also got this pencil skirt. It's Jill Sander, so that is a major steal, and I actually don't own a pencil skirt, but I really want one. I think I might actually hem this to be a little bit shorter to give it more of a Fran Drescher, the nanny kind of vibe. The last thing I have is this Fendi dress, and I got it because it reminds me a bit of like a Victorian chemise, and I decided to layer it over a Victorian petticoat and under this contemporary corset. You can also shop my secondhand favorites that I picked out on the website if you use my link below, and you can also use my code MINA for 35% off your first order. I mean, it's pretty obvious why books are symbols of intellectualism. Books are used to host knowledge and research. We all had to read a number of books for school, and the act of reading itself has actually always been a highly regarded skill and gatekept from women and the lower classes for centuries at a time. It's not lost to me how 99.99% of all civil rights activists, feminists, and revolutionaries, that's a made-up figure, but it feels like it's a lot of them, have all emphasized the importance of the right to education because knowledge is power. So when we see someone posting their stacks of books or carrying a bookstore tote bag, we'd like to think this person is actually a reader and not just flexing that they do, I guess, in fact, have the ability to read.
I do know how to read, though.
But books have also always been used to signify status, not just personal interests. For example, back in the 1st century, the Roman philosopher Seneca wrote about his distaste towards people who owned a lot of books, but who didn't actually read. He complained that many people without a school education use books not as tools for study, but as decorations for the dining room. Of the flamboyant collector, he wrote that, "You can see the complete works of orators and historians on shelves up to the ceiling because, like bathrooms, a library has become an essential ornament of a rich house." For context, private bathrooms used to be like a frivolous luxury because the majority of people just used public bathhouses. Sociologist Frank Furedi adds context to this hater energy in his article Bookish Fools. At the time, there was a sort of public reading mania called the recitatio, aka public literary reading conducted by authors and poets. And maybe it would have been less annoying if the readings were all good, but many wealthy citizens took advantage of these public opportunities for self-promotion for their mediocre work.
Julia, Rob hurts.
Naturally, these kinds of mediocre writers were targets for all sorts of contempt and sarcastic humor. And many actually prominent writers and satirists of the time, like Horace, Petronius, Persius, and Juvenal, absolutely made fun of these people. I'll read a critical excerpt from the Roman satirist Martial. You read to me as I stand, you read to me as I sit. You read to me as I run, you read to me as I shit. I flee to the baths, you boom in my ear. I head for the pool, you won't let me swim. I hurry to dinner, you stop me in my tracks. I arrive at the meal, your words make me gag. But back to home libraries, the practice of building out display libraries to showcase material wealth and cultural prestige continued for hundreds of years later, even still today, some might say. So, Richard de Bury's essay Philobiblon, written in 1345 but published in 1473, is said to be the earliest English treatise on the delights of literature. But Philobiblon says very little about de Bury's actual experience of reading, and that's because his real interest was collecting books rather than reading them. His biographer, William de Chambre, wrote in not these words exactly, but essentially, "Damn, bitch, you live like this." De Chambre claimed that books surrounded de Bury in all of his residences, and that so many books lay about his bedchamber that you were barely able to stand or move without stepping on them. By the 16th century, reading became so in vogue that people wanted to be immortalized as readers. Paintings of this time period depict subjects devoted to reading or embracing their books, and the effect it has on the viewer is strong still today. For example, even if we don't know who Dante Alighieri is, when we look at the painting, Allegorical Portrait of Dante by Agnolati Bronzino, seeing Dante with such a large edition of Paradiso tells us that this man is a culturally accomplished man. He's not even reading the book in the painting. It's like one of the most obvious examples of just using a book as a prop to say something larger about that person. Reading became way more accessible throughout the 18th century, so the elite now had to figure out new ways to separate themselves from the poor within this book space. And that's when we got the literary critic, who separated the good readers, the elite, from the bad readers, the poor. Edith Wharton wrote in her 1903 essay, The Vice of Reading, "To read is not a virtue, but to read well is an art, and an art that only the born reader can acquire." And she later goes on to say that the mechanical reader lacked innate aptitude and the gift of reading and could never acquire the art. Virginia Woolf wrote in her 1925 essay, The Common Reader, that the average reader was hasty, inaccurate, and superficial. And of course, his deficiencies as a critic are too obvious to be pointed out. This is really tricky because I do think there is such a thing as good writing and bad writing, and some books are more challenging and smarter, I guess, than other books. And a lot of what makes someone a good writer or a good reader does come from access to education, which costs money. So there is like this subtle link between being a good reader and having a certain privileged kind of upbringing. But obviously, I think there are way less barriers now than there were in the 18th and 19th centuries. For example, K through 12 education is mandated, and the internet and libraries have a plethora of accessible resources. At the same time, I think anti-intellectuals use this historical positioning of reading equals money to justify being ignorant. I don't know if this is still necessarily a prominent group of people anymore, but I do remember when I was on Twitter a couple years ago, people would get attacked all the time, and they were called classists for just using big words. And in these cases, I don't think it's classist because if you have access to Twitter in the first place, you probably have access to an online dictionary where you could look up that word. Not to get even more in the weeds of this, but I do think that sometimes people use a large vocabulary to flex on other people. And I definitely get that, not trying to say that these people don't exist. But maybe rather than trying to be pretentious for the sake of it, a person could be using big vocabulary because they actually are genuinely interested in vocabulary and are just trying to get words to stick in their brains by using them more often in daily life. I don't know. It really depends on the person, but I think that on the internet, we have a tendency to just assume the worst in everyone. I actually saw a lot of this kind of rhetoric targeted towards the dark academia subculture because of its affinity to glamorize academic education. Dark academia places a heavy emphasis on reading, writing, and humanities degrees, with people of this internet subculture taking photos of old libraries, vintage leather satchels full of books, and poetry verses. It's part preppy academia and part gothic, and it appealed to me a lot during 2018-ish because I was in college at the time, and I needed to romanticize how much I didn't like being in college. I never dressed as dark academia because I didn't love the associated brown-toned tweed style, but my Tumblr account at the time was full of like dark academia imagery, which is actually very funny because I was very heavily invested into like streetwear at this time. So I had like flaming yellow hair, and I don't look like the type of person that would have had a dark academia Tumblr blog, but alas, I'm a woman of multitudes. Anyway, what's interesting to me is that most of the people in the community were not studying in traditional elitist institutions like Harvard and Oxford and Ivy League universities. They were people who I think just genuinely loved to read classic books. But yet there was still a romanticization of these specific universities and the upper class upbringing associated with students who attended them. All of this is to say that with all the elitism associated with books, it's therefore unsurprising then that celebrities love to take pictures of themselves reading. Not to shade Marc Jacobs in any way.
No shade. No shade.
But just as an example, he once uploaded a picture of himself on Instagram reading the collected stories of Cookie Mueller, and British Vogue actually reported on it. They said, as much as the designer is making an innocent recommendation, he is also broadcasting his participation in niche book culture. I'm sure Mr. Jacobs actually reads the books he posts because he posts a lot of books, and I'm not trying to imply otherwise. What I think is interesting, though, is the choice of book he chooses to post. Similarly, Kendall Jenner was popped on a yacht with Chelsea Hodson's Tonight I'm Someone Else, and Gigi Hadid was photographed with Albert Camus's The Stranger during Milan Fashion Week. Once again, not saying that these people didn't actually read these books, nor am I saying that these people have like secretly bad taste that they're not revealing, but I do think it's interesting in a general sense that celebrities are rarely ever photographed reading culturally like unglamorous books, like grocery store romances or self-help books. And maybe it's because certain books have sort of integrated themselves into the fashion space. It was Vivienne Westwood who once said, "A status symbol is a book. A very easy book to read is The Catcher in the Rye. Walk around with that under your arm, kids. That is status." And to this point, Daniel Rogers writes for British Vogue the necessary extra element of looking stylish along with your book to get this kind of status cred. He writes, "Of course, this only works if you have committed yourself to both books and looks. A well-dressed nerd is not the same as a poorly dressed one, and this has proved a powerful combination in mainstream media. On Gossip Girl and White Lotus, well-heeled scions and pretentious teens tote Eve Babbitts and Nietzsche and Elena Ferrante as though they were Fendi baguettes. And, as the New York Times recently uncovered, some celebrities intentionally set up photo ops to show off the latest It book, handpicked by a celebrity book stylist." I kind of wish I had that job, not gonna lie. While there's other mediums to showcase your own elite taste, the unique value of a book is that it just looks really good in photos. I'll read a quote from the cold healing Substack essay Book Objects. "You can take a picture of yourself with the frame of the movie you're watching in the background, or post a Spotify screenshot of a song you're listening to alongside a landscape picture. But because a book object is a more natural bridge between physical space and the realm of art, it comes across more naturally in photos. The book is also extremely portable. You can take it to a coffee shop, a beach, a hotel room, a bathtub. In these situations, books can be used to also showcase the equally important environment you're reading in. It's all about the collection of objects that all work together in one image." The Cold Healing Substack writer is anonymous, so I don't know their name, but they called these curated photos of books within physical spaces as reading scenes. As an example, they write, "When a 16-year-old girl takes a picture of the bell jar, the edition with the rose, next to her coffee on the glass table on her parents' balcony on a cloudy day, she's creating a reading scene, permanently capturing her moment of reading and also saying that this is how she reads. And because it's how she reads and because she's touching the realm of ideas that the book contains, she's saying, this is who I am." The desire to telegraph this sort of cultural capital is so widespread, and because of social media, where everyone has the capacity to be an influencer, the power of book messaging affects people outside the celebrity circuit as well. There was even a trend on TikTok of people creating fake Tom Ford coffee table books because of the status associated with said coffee table books. The way that the TikTok algorithm works, aka you could blow up at any time and you could even have a viral video with like 200 followers, the medium of TikTok influences everyone to view themselves as a brand, which encourages people into putting more of an effort into curating their home spaces to convey a certain look to guests or even just to coworkers on a Zoom meeting. Interior designer Nina Freudenberger said, "Books are the most important accessory in the house. Books show someone's true interests or their values or what they want their legacy to be. They answer the questions, who is this person? Or who do they want other people to think they are?" Ashley Tisdale actually raised a bit of internet controversy following her Architectural Digest tour when she admitted that the bookshelves had been staged.
I had my husband go to a bookstore and I was like, you need to get 400 books.
But Ashley is far from the only person who's worked with a library curator. There are specialists on the market, like on Clarendon Road, who make it a profession to curate home libraries, yachts, and hotels. But of course, there's many ways to display one's books. The new trend that I've seen is the interior design aesthetic dubbed bookshelf wealth on TikTok. Potentially as backlash towards the overly curated libraries, the point of bookshelf wealth is to display an eclectic collection of books that the owner has actually read. The overall look is supposed to suggest authenticity. You've been collecting books and art over the years, not just putting out items as props to achieve a certain look, hence why there are seemingly random piles of them just about everywhere. Like, you didn't plan to have this many books, but you can't help it as a highbrow Renaissance woman. Of course, the critics say that this is not any more authentic at the end of the day. But all of this is to say that print books have meanings. This is probably why that while there was a scare when Kindles were first introduced that they would overtake physical books, these e-readers never did usurp the market. Digital texts do not serve as markers for cultural capital or for cultural distinction. And that's because what you're seen reading is probably more important than the act of reading itself, sadly. Given this love affair for physical books, it's also not surprising that print books have made a major comeback since pre-pandemic times.
These are my books. I couldn't bring them all because it got too heavy.
In 2020, publishers sold nearly 60 million more print books than the year before, possibly because people were stuck at home. But what's interesting is that the numbers have kept going up, even in 2021, hitting a new record. Sales have dipped a little recently, but they still remain 12% above 2019 levels. This phenomenon isn't confined to the United States. In other parts of the world as well, readers love the feel of turning pages in their hands, the World Economic Forum reported. In a 2019 essay for The Guardian, Bethany Patch argued that the book industry isn't dead. That's just an excuse to keep salaries low. Top editor Katie Loftus left the publishing industry in 2022, citing the mental health strain, telling the bookseller, "At the same time as working hours have increased, the pressure has too. This is, I believe, at least partly because financial targets are becoming more and more the focal point of the publishers every day, despite publishing being of its nature extremely unpredictable, and despite record profits being made." So yeah, despite sales, careers in publishing are more precarious than ever. So naturally, new authors have started to use any platform available to them to advertise their writing. I mean, authors have always held some responsibility when it comes to promoting their own work. This isn't like an inherently new thing. They've engaged in public readings, book signing events, etc. But in recent years, what's new is that some authors have taken on the roles of influencer and creative director as well. In October, Nylon published a piece on the so-called literary it girl, detailing the inventive new ways that many young female writers are marketing their work and themselves. For example, Atessa Moshfegh walked in Mariam Nasserzade's fall 2022 runway show. Ali Rowbottom's book launch party for Aesthetica was covered by downtown photographer Cobra Snake and had a Botox booth, and Claudia Day partnered with Universal Flowering to release a custom perfume for her book, Daughter. Author Madeline Cash said in the article, "Writers have to advocate for themselves like never before. You can't be the hermetic, enigmatic Salinger Pynchon type anymore. You have to sell yourself. I taught at Sarah Lawrence recently and the kids were like, how do you become a writer? And I was like, have generational wealth. If you don't have rich parents, being a writer is 1 part talent and 2 parts networking. Being a writer in 2023 is also being an agent, an editor, and PR girl. The Nylon article sparked discourse around literary it girls, featuring a lot of pretty harsh and frankly misogynistic criticism of the writers discussed. But playwright Allison K. Williams defended these girls, writing, "I've done a lot of events in my life, and there are quite a few clues in the article that the writers are leveraging friends much more than spending cash. These writers identified their readers and created moments that got these readers excited. Yeah, there's privilege at work, but not an unattainable level." Rowbottom, who was discussed in the Nylon piece, wrote her own response in byline. She goes into further detail about her past experience marketing her debut novel through traditional channels and how that drove her to try something new with her next book. In the end, sales fell in line, disappointing as they often are when a book is marketed as something it's not to an audience ill-suited to its questions. That was years ago now. Years in which I've written and published a novel, Aesthetica, for which I chose my own author photo and took an active hand in every element of production, from the publisher's marketplace announcement, to the jacket copy, to the publicity. I'm not ashamed that I've thought carefully about my ideal readers and how to reach them, nor am I ashamed to have done everything I can to promote my book, essentially to a world of readers addicted to their phones. She also brings up Walt Whitman, who had his own penchant for self-promotion, and the double standard placed on women who do the same. My personal take is that I do think there's a certain privilege of being a literary it girl because the overwhelming majority of them seem to be pretty white, thin girls who live in New York City or other metropolitan areas, which come with their own high costs of living and inaccessibility. But I don't think that these women are the problem. I think it's just like a bad system developing into a different bad system. And people in it are just trying to thrive in any way they can, using whatever tools they're fortunate enough to have. Like, I can't hate against that, but I think we can address the inequality that still exists. The impact of this new way of marketing, though, is that books become integrated into people's identities. By doing the work to attach their books with specific designers or certain scents, writers are more than ever helping to curate a niche identity for their reader base. Sometimes readers will already do that on their own, like with how many coquette girls adopted Sylvia Plath and the Virgin Suicides into their aesthetic. But with new releases, it's becoming a marketing technique for the writer to help out in aestheticizing their books as well. BookTok is another area of marketing potential and is actually how Colleen Hoover, arguably the most successful female author of this moment in time, got her success. Hoover is a polarizing figure.
What got me back into reading, what made me fall in love with Colleen Hoover.
I would like to fist fight Colleen Hoover in a Wendy's parking lot.
I have read almost every single book written by Colleen Hoover.
I have read all of her books.
I love her.
I am a Colleen Hoover hater first and a person second.
It made me homicidal.
It's had all these stories I wanted to tell.
We both laughed at our son's big balls.
Transparency. I haven't read any of her books, but people I know online do tend to make fun of them for just about like every reason, from the character names to their writing style to the kind of plot points that tend to emerge. And yet Colleen Hoover is so successful because you don't have to be well liked by critics to be well liked by the public. And well liked she is. In 2022 alone, Hoover's books sold 14.3 million copies and in total more than 24 million copies to date. Time magazine named Hoover one of the most influential people of 2023. Her fans on TikTok, known as the Cohos, make content like book reviews, reading vlogs, and analyses of her novels. Edel Flood, head of lifestyle and education for TikTok UK, explains the appeal of BookTok. Content on TikTok tends to be more authentic. You don't need any video editing experience or a big following. It's more like getting a book recommendation from a friend. BookTok also sometimes operates like a digital book club where people all read the same books and discuss them. I'm a little plugged into BookTok. I'm not like fully in the realm of it because I also follow and make other types of content, but I do have friends who are deeply entrenched in the BookTok community, and I do watch a good number of BookTok videos, okay? I don't know why I watch them. But even though I watch a lot of BookTok, I don't refer to BookTok as like a whole for recommendations because I feel like my taste in books is very specific and I've been led astray many times trying to follow someone else's taste. For example, I did not love the seven Deaths of Evelyn Hugo. I didn't like The Silent Patient. I didn't like The Paris Apartment. I don't like actually a lot of books that I've seen get really popular. And so, yeah, now I just like listen to very specific people or my friends who I feel like know my tastes and are able to like recommend books based on like what they know that I like. But to give you an idea of how much BookTok is actually impacting the industry, NPD BookScan says that readers purchased 825 million copies of print books in the US in 2021, which was the best-selling year for print books since the company began tracking data in 2004. And analysts believe young people posting about books on social media played a serious role in those big numbers. In the end, BookTok is impacting the way publishers find authors. Instead of finding good material and building an author up with the PR power of the publishing house, editors are now looking for writers with a following already, who can guarantee at least a chunk of sales from the start. That kind of equation used to only exist when celebrities decided to publish memoirs. Branding is important, obviously. As we've already talked about, different books carry different meanings. It's way more chic to be reading The Stranger than it is to be reading The Viscount Who Loved Me, even if there's nothing inherently wrong with reading the latter book. And part of what determines these meanings is built into the book's branding. This is why some readers criticize Elena Ferrante's books for their cover design. Elena Ferrante is a female author, or at least a female pen name. No one knows her real identity. But her books follow women and their lives, and the covers feature like airy photos of women and toddlers. The cover of My Brilliant Friend shows a cupcake-like bride, and Those Who Leave and Those Who Stay has a barefoot woman in a sundress carrying a toddler on a beach. This has culminated in discourse around reading her books in public, with some fans claiming that it's embarrassing because a casual observer might mistake them for reading like grocery store romance chick lit, when actually Ferrante's work is pretty highly regarded as like serious literature.
It's just nothing like what you would expect from just looking at these horrible covers. Just nothing like that. Really, really bad covers.
Okay, by the way, I use this term serious literature because I feel like it's so subjective what serious literature is. I'm not trying to knock the fact that Elena Ferrante books are good literature. I'm just like poking fun at the concept of serious literature to begin with. Does that make sense? So Slate conducted an interview with the cover designer for the Neapolitan trilogy, asking her, have you communicated with Elena Ferrante about the covers? Do you know she likes them? And the designer replied, yes, we showed Elena the covers and she approved them. She trusts us and has faith in our work, and she doesn't intervene much in these kinds of choices, though she does share her impressions. She agreed with our choice to purposely use low-class images, and she was surprised by the doubts expressed by some readers. We also had the feeling that many people didn't understand the game we were playing, that of, let's say, dressing an extremely refined story with a touch of vulgarity. People have also criticized the way that trashy romances have been marketed as a whole. Traditionally, the difference between steamy romance novel covers and the covers for young adult fiction used to be pretty stark. You get the airbrushed shirtless Fabio on books like The Viscount Who Loved Me, while simple illustrations were on A Wrinkle in Time, Harry Potter, and The Hunger Games. But today, trashy romances are now getting cutesy illustration rebrands that make them look like young adult fiction. And some consumers are confused and upset by two genres merging into one. And I agree. To be quite frank, I'm kind of annoyed by the category of women's literature to begin with, because I'm like, what does that even mean? Why is men's literature just literature and then women's literature like its own separate thing? I don't know. With saying that, I definitely don't think that women's literature and young adult literature should be conflated either, because then it lends itself to this idea that women are immature and write and read childish books, which implies the flip side, which is like men write and read serious books. They read real adult literature. And my problem with it is just like, this has been a harmful rhetoric present throughout history. Charlemagne formally introduced literacy to European girls in the 8th century by decreeing that all churches in his kingdom should have schools for girls and boys. He also introduced more books in the common vernacular rather than in proper Latin, which only boys were trained to read at the time. The mass availability of books in vernacular meant that more girls were able to read. However, men being men, scorned vernacular literature, claiming that these books were overly sentimental and realistic, and there was too much love, friendship, animals, and magic potions, which sounds like an amazing time, and I don't know why they weren't into it.
I hate men.
Another criticism towards women's literature is aimed less at the content and more at the idea of women reading, period. Joan Acasella wrote for The New Yorker, "A big worry was that reading was something women could do alone, without anyone to guide their thinking. They would thus learn to think independently." The horror! Though certain literature has been accessible to generally upper class women throughout history, marketing of books directly to middle and working class women audiences really took off in the US in the mid-19th century with the introduction of the dime novel. Due to the dime novel's low price and its widespread availability, these books were pretty formulaic and aimed at working class audiences, and therefore developed a reputation as degraded literature. While there were dime novels marketed to men, it was mostly women who read them, and this is because most urban working class women were laboring in factories where hours were long and conditions were poor, and these novels allowed them a sense of escapism and gave them things to talk about with their coworkers. Some authors were upset about this development, believing that the degradation, aka feminization, of literature was impacting the success and prestige of their own work. For example, Nathaniel Hawthorne said, "America is now wholly given over to a damned mob of scribbling women, and I should have no chance of success while the public taste is occupied with their trash, and should be ashamed of myself if I did succeed." Other critics thought women's dime novels, which typically centered on romance and marriage, represented a nation in moral decline, as it would encourage working class women to adopt the sensibilities of middle and upper class women. Edward G. Salmon wrote in his 1886 essay, What Girls Read, "Let us go into the houses of the poor and try to discover what is the effect on the maiden mind of the trash which maidens buy. We should probably find that the high-flown conceits and pretensions of the poor girls of the period, their dislike of manual work and love of freedom, spring largely from notions imbibed in the course of a perusal of their penny fictions." But regardless of the book's actual content, there's something subversive about women reading. Independent thought. Joanna Thomas Core wrote for The Guardian, "There's something about the female bookworm, face obscured by a novel, hidden within plain sight, possibly pondering the bigger questions of life, possibly fantasizing, that can serve as an affront. The onus has long been on women to facilitate easy human relations, and lone reading is an occupation that is not compatible with the social self." I feel like the most recent scandalous development in women's literature was the bodice ripper, which is a romance subgenre that was introduced in the 1970s, notably with Kathleen E. Woodiwis's The Flame and the Flower, published in 1972. The 1970s and 80s was the peak of trashy romance novels, and the publisher Harlequin Books Limited, now Harlequin Enterprises, was highly influential in the subgenre development. But back to The Flame and the Flower. Before this book, mass-marketed romance novels featured very little sexually explicit material. But this flashy new genre, the bodice ripper, featured beautiful, virginal, yet fierce and independent women who would catch the eye of a handsome alpha male who would attempt to seduce and dominate her. Definitely the precursor for 50 Shades of Grey, but usually in a historical landscape. The landscape of how we publish and consume literature has changed, though, and now most readers consume racy romance fiction with the discretion of e-readers. I honestly wonder if the increased shame around trashy romantic print books is why we're seeing a spike in romance books getting marketed with the cute cartoony covers I mentioned earlier, rather than with the traditional sexy covers of couples embracing. But all in all, the through line connecting these three time periods of women's literature seems to be the subject of romance. Nora Roberts, one of the most popular romance novelists of the 1980s and 90s, once said, "All genres are scorned by literary types, but none more so than romance. But then, it's a genre written by women for women. Unless a guy writes one and they call it something else, and it gets reviewed and made into a movie. A woman writes it, and it's just one of those." Not all women's literature is romantic. The romance themes sometimes surface because these books, at their core, center female interiority, female pleasure, female aspiration, and that's honestly like the real reason why these books are disparaged by male critics, because men will read a book written by a man that has some romance in it. But yeah, I think the problem really is that these books center women. I should point out women and girls consistently read more and read fiction far more than men and boys, so they've increasingly been recognized as a primary market for publishers. In the UK, the readers of the top-selling books across the board were 54% female and 46% male. However, for the top 10 best-selling female authors, only 19% of their readers are men and 81% are women. But for the top 10 best-selling male authors, the split is almost even, 55% men and 45% women. This obviously affects women writers and the type of stories that get funded and published. Siri Hustvedt raised the concern that this disparity could lead the medium of literature into becoming, in the eyes of culture, a highly feminized form. As the concept of the novel itself becomes feminized, it runs the risk of being dismissed. There's a danger that the novel gets dismissed as a feminized form, especially since the history of the novel from its 18th century origins was rooted in the idea of it as frivolous literature for leisured women who didn't receive a formal education in science or politics. It was male writers such as Samuel Richardson, as well as a generation of male critics, who were seen to professionalize fiction writing, which is perhaps why many women feel suspicious that the "where are all the men" conversation too often goes hand in hand with the question, is the novel dead? Thus, not really surprising that BookTok is overwhelmingly composed of women creators and audiences. So the main criticisms I've seen towards the BookTok community is that some people will gatekeep books, tout unachievable reading habits, promote overconsumption, and then, of course, there's all kinds of fandom drama that can spring up too. There's also this pressure to read the same books as everyone else in the community, especially if you're a small creator trying to make a name for yourself. All this is to say that BookTok can feel very monolithic, especially with the general bias towards fantasy, dark romance, young adult fiction, and wellness books. But who's setting the precedent for these kind of trends? TikTok is a visual medium, and naturally, white cis then richer people are able to rise more quickly than other groups across the board. Deanna Schwartz and Megan Collins Sullivan wrote for NPR, "The majority of the most successful BookTok romance novels are about white straight characters and by white authors, with few notable exceptions. The books that go viral on TikTok tend to be by white authors and mostly white women." And this ends up having ramifications outside of BookTok. And not just because you should be reading like a diverse number of stories, just because that is better for our own personal developments, but just like within the industry itself, there are so many books that I think are excellent and don't make a bestsellers list. And so many of these books are written by non-white authors. There's definitely a pattern and a marked disadvantage that authors of color have to face in publishing. Of course, at the end of the day, much of this stems from people needing to cash in with the least amount of effort possible. Books that are similar to other recently successful books get more funding, and so it just feeds into this like negative feedback cycle where the same stories get published over and over again. Joanna Thomas-Core talked to Fourth Estate editorial director Kashani Widyaratna about the Sally Rooney phenomenon, in which every publisher rushed to find young female writers to fill the Rooney-shaped hole. This mode of thinking leads to the reproduction of something that already exists, which contributes to these kinds of formulaic books that utilize all the same plot devices and writing conventions. The TikTok algorithm itself regurgitates this line of thinking because it'll just generate similar content that you already like, preventing diversity or variation in both what people are seeing and what people are making, because money is in the views. And as a digital creator, the way to maximize those views is by regurgitating what the algorithm wants. Faith Young of Hell Yeah Books said in an interview, at the beginning, when you first join, there are definitely 6 to 10 books that everyone speaks about. Also, this is not just something that is related to BookTok. It's just like across the board for like all of TikTok, all of YouTube, all of social media to begin with. People just like end up having to make content, me included, of what the algorithm wants, aka what so many other people are talking about. Even though I love to talk about all these other kind of niche things, I have to like decide how to space them out throughout the year, because if I was just doing like niche topics, I wouldn't be making enough money to do this as a full-time career. The other moral argument is that the popular BookTok books tend to feature copy-paste, not like the other girls type of generic protagonists or characters who are purposely mean and unlikable like Mosh Veg's protagonist, and that by consuming only these sort of narratives will encourage young girls to be more like these characters. My 2 cents about that is I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to write or read about unlikable characters. And, similarly, this is the argument that's used against Hoover as well, because she gets a lot of flack for portraying abuse and violence in her stories, which, once again, I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. I don't believe that writing about something is automatically an endorsement of that thing. And I also don't believe that reading something means that you will automatically internalize said thing. But I do get where the worries come, because when I take a step back from just like the act of reading a book itself, I'm like, yeah, this is not a great environment to be reading books, because the way that we've aestheticized books through online spaces and the way that we've integrated certain books into our own identities can be really worrisome. Someone posted on TikTok a bit ago the coquette bookshelf at their Barnes & Noble. And the idea, I guess, was that the booksellers wanted to curate some books that they think coquette girls would like. But what everyone pointed out in the replies was that Most of these books have violent and traumatic subject matter, and why would someone who likes bows want to be associated with these books? To give context, the coquette subculture is a pretty polarizing one, with some of the girls in it just liking cutesy girl aesthetic things and some of the other girls in it actually romanticizing abuse. And I think that divide led this bookseller to be confused, unfortunately. Similarly, I saw a TikTok discussion the other day of discourse on how to categorize Lana Del Rey's early aesthetic. Like, people were saying, is she coquette, or is she vintage Americana, or is she dollette, or is vintage Americana a subset of coquette? And at this point, I think we've just lost the plot, because I don't think in 2012, when Lana Del Rey was emerging into the mainstream, that she thought about these very limited terms in how to style and market herself. Like, I'm pretty sure she just had certain references that she liked, and that was it. But all this aesthetic categorization, aestheticization makes it seem like no one has an actual personality anymore, and people just do things to appear a certain way. So as an example, just staying on the coquette train of thought, if you dress coquette, but saw this Barnes & Noble bookshelf and you picked out Lolita from this bookshelf and you didn't actually like the book, would you admit that you didn't like it? Or would you assume that you didn't get it because the rest of your friends in this community liked it? Or would you pretend to like it so that it doesn't interfere with your own personal branding? Or maybe you didn't want to read it and you pretended you did just to fit in. There's so many parts of this now that have emerged because books are so tied to people's aesthetic brand identity. And then on the other side of it, people's Instagram feeds are so highly curated that a lot of us have internalized the idea that things posted online are fake to begin with. We just assume they're fake. So when someone posts a photo of them reading, especially if it's a celebrity or an influencer with no public history of being a reader, we're so quick to assume that they didn't actually read that book they posed with. Back to the Kendall Jenner example, I remember seeing so much online discourse of people being like, Kendall Jenner did not read this book. Because I guess her brand identity isn't correlated with reading these types of books. I don't know. And then with all the discourse about Gen Alpha not knowing how to read and seeing people on public transit looking at their phones instead of looking at books, it also starts to feel like the common person doesn't know how to actually read and critically think anymore either. Okay, in conclusion, I have no idea what this entire video was about. I just kind of wanted to talk about different book things that I've been seeing. As I said, there's just been a lot of book emergence within the fashion space. I've been seeing a lot of downtown New York girls promoting reading and doing book related events and hosting very splashy book events. I've been seeing books in association with different subcultures and different aesthetics. I wanted to evaluate what the book object is today and how it's changed over time because, books have been around for a while. Anyways, I do want to say at the end of the day, I am pro booktok and I am pro aestheticizing books, which I know might be a hot take. Of course, there are problems, like I mentioned earlier, but I think it's all around really exciting that people are talking about books more and that this is all much better than the alternative, which I guess would be people thinking that books are stupid and not aesthetic and it's embarrassing to be seen reading. That's so much worse than what we have now. Yeah, I just wanted to raise some points and consider the kinds of books that we read and how we have a lot more agency in deciding what books we're reading. There's so many books out there that exist beyond the sphere of influence of TikTok and of Instagram and etc. But okay, we have made it to the book recommendation portion of the video. I just have 4 books that I want to talk about because this video has gone on so long already. The first book I want to recommend is Of Human Bondage by Somerset Maugham. This book is supposedly his masterpiece. I can't really speak on that because I haven't read his other books, but I do have The Razor's Edge in my queue and I have seen the Painted Veil movie with Edward Norton and Naomi Watts, but I haven't read the book. Of Human Bondage is an orphan story. I love those. It was written in 1915, so it's a ye old orphan, and his name is Philip, and we follow Philip throughout the course of his life from childhood into adulthood. It's also weird in the sense that Philip is so deeply unlikable in some parts of the book, but by the end, I didn't want to say goodbye to him. I felt something really deep for this character. I also think that Maugham's writing style is gorgeous, but also very palatable. And so it's an easy story to read despite the fact that it's over 600 pages. It really flies by. But yeah, I don't know. I love this book so much. I kind of want to reread it I just like love like a life saga, slice of life, like day in the life kind of story. Also really love A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, which is another book of this genre, I'd say. Another recommendation I have is Kindred by Octavia Butler. Kindred is so good. It's a time-traveling story. It's about a Black woman of the modern time. I think the book was written like in the 1970s. So she's a woman of the 1970s, and she gets abruptly like time traveled back in time to the antebellum South, where she meets and tries to save the white son of a plantation owner named Rufus. I don't want to give too much away because there are like some crazy plot points that get revealed throughout the course of the book, but it is a fantastic story. Really brutal, obviously, because of the subject matter. It's emotionally gut-wrenching, and it poses a lot of like what-if questions about race that I think Octavia Butler is able to ask with a lot of care and understanding. Notes on an Execution by Danya Kukafka. It follows a serial killer who's been on death row, and it takes place like the hours leading up to his execution. But it's not just told through his like point of view. It also like switches off between multiple different people's points of views, people who have been affected by this person's violence. And we also get a point of view from his mother, her life before conceiving him. It's just a great and empathetic book. I think Danya is able to remove judgment and remove like this idea of trying to push a certain political agenda, and she's just trying to give like the most full and complete understanding of all the people involved in the story. And it's definitely difficult to do, but she does such a good job. It's such a good book. The last book I have on recommendation is Ex-Wife by Ursula Parrott. This book was written in 1929. It's very Sex and the City coded. It's like about a young woman who just got divorced and sort of like her romantic rendezvous and her friendships and her life living in New York City. It's actually very modern in terms of its themes, despite being like a time capsule. Her attitudes like towards men and towards like female friendships and stuff, like it's surprisingly modern and relatable, and I really enjoyed reading it. It's a very glamorous story, and they actually adapted it into a movie called The Divorcee in 1930 starring Norma Shear, but honestly, the book is so much better than the movie. So yeah, I highly recommend checking it out, especially if you're a fan of the jazz age. Okay, this is all I have for today. Thank you so much for listening to me talk about this for so long. You can leave in the comments any book recommendations you have for me, or for just like general book recommendations for anyone who is looking at the comments. Also, thank you to our sponsor, ThredUp. Once again, you can shop my secondhand favorites with the link below, and you can use my code MINA for 35% off your first order. Okay, thanks. See ya.